Hi, my name is Trevor, and today I'm going to be showing you the fundamentals of putting together your very own desktop computer. As you can see here, this is the computer that I'm going to be showing you guys how to build. Now, when building a computer, you need to have a variety of different components in order for it to function. First of all, you need a case. Then, you need a motherboard. Then, you need a processor. Then, you need RAM. You also need a power supply. You also need some kind of storage and some form of graphics component, whether that is onboard graphics on the motherboard or a graphics card like you see right here. To start off, the component holding all of our parts together is our Cooler Master Light 5 RGB mid-tower case. As you can see in the front, we have 3 RGB fans that you can change to whatever color you want, and in the back right here we also have a non-RGB fan to help push the hot air out. The next part we will be working with is the motherboard. Today we have a MSI B350 Tomahawk motherboard that is going to hold all of our components inside. This is going to be the home for a lot of other parts inside of our case. I chose this specific motherboard because of its compatibility with the processor I decided to buy. On the other hand, the motherboard is going to be home for a lot of other parts, such as the processor, the RAM, our M.2 SSD drive, and our graphics card. For our RAM, we have 2 8GB sticks of G.Skill Ripjaw RAM. 16 gigabytes is a common amount of RAM for any build like this or even just general builds out there. For our processor, we'll be running a Ryzen 7 2700X. This uses an AM4 socket, which is the socket I was talking about earlier that our motherboard is compatible with. Some of the reasons I chose this processor are its ability to overclock and its 8 cores and 16 threads that it provides to its user. As for our graphics card, we currently have a Radeon R9 290X from Asus inside this build. Although this is an outdated card, it can probably run most basic games on the market right now. Lastly, on the motherboard, we have our M.2 solid state drive, or SSD. This is a Samsung 970 EVO, and it has about 250 gigabyte SSD drives, specifically this one, way outperform any hard drive that you could possibly get. This is one of the reasons I have one, and also one of the reasons I decided to install Windows on this drive. Outside of the motherboard, but still in the storage range, we have a Western Digital Black 1TB hard drive. Now, this is not nearly as fast as the SSD I have in my M.2 socket on my motherboard. It still is able to hold files, images, anything basic that isn't any sort of program that I would want to run. Now lastly, right here in the case, we have our 750 watt gold standard EVGA power supply. This specific power supply is fully modular, meaning that I don't have to use what cables I don't need to use. This is my personal preference because I don't have to have extra cables inside here cluttered when I don't need them. There are also semi-modular and non-modular power supplies on the market that you can use if you just want an easier build. Alright, let's do this. Now, before we do anything, we're going to need a screwdriver. Today I have a Craftsman magnetic tip screwdriver that is going to help us a lot while we're doing this project. The magnetic tip is going to help when we need to have screws go into tiny nooks and crannies inside of our computer. This is going to make it easier to get them in and then screw them in while they're inside. Now, let's get our case ready for us to install our other parts inside of it. Now, let's get our case ready so that we can install our motherboard and our other parts inside. First, we're going to want to screw off our glass and then take our glass off and put it off to the side for right now. Inside of the case, we are going to see that we are provided with 9 of these little standoffs that we're going to be installing inside of our case. With these standoffs, simply all we're going to do is screw them into the little holes that we're going to see inside of the case. For us specifically, we have an ATX motherboard, meaning that it's going to take up the entirety of our case. Now, before we put anything in the case, we're going to want to get our motherboard set up. As you can see here, we have our motherboard set up on top of a box so that we can see properly how to install each individual part. Right now, we're going to start with the CPU. As you can see right here, this is our CPU socket. This is where we are going to be installing our processor. The first step to installing our processor is going to be flipping up this metal rod right there. This rod right here is going to keep the processor in place once we have it installed. This right here is our processor. As you can see, it already has a little bit of thermal paste on it. Before we would do anything with this, we would normally put a pea-sized bit of thermal paste right in the center of our CPU. Since I've already done it, I don't need to do it again, so I'm not going to be doing that here today. Now, what we're going to notice is that in the bottom left-hand corner of the processor, we see a little arrow. This arrow is going to line up with the arrow on the motherboard itself. The processor is going to be facing this way, and all you're going to want to do, and not press down, is to just simply let it drop right into place. And that is how you install your processor. And the next step is all you have to do is push down this metal prong until it clicks, and there you go, you have your processor installed. Now, to make it easy, the smallest bit on our motherboard that we will be installing is our Samsung 970 EVO 250 gigabyte SSD. This you need to find the M.2 slot for, which on our motherboard is going to be right here. Now all we have to do is put it in at an angle until we find the right spot, until it clicks in there. As we can see, it clicked in. Now the next step is to simply push it down so that it lines up with that little hole right next to where my finger is. And we're going to take the screw that it came with and screw it in. Now on the more difficult end, we will be installing our CPU fan, which is going to go right over the top of where we installed our CPU. As you can see on either side, there are little prongs that our CPU fan is going to connect to. These were screwed in prior to recording the video. Well, the first thing we're going to do is take the part that can't be locked in place, or this side, and we're going to put it and lock it into place on this side, and then lock it on the other side. Now that it is in place, we can take the flip that we saw earlier and flip it all the way over to the other side. Don't be scared to put a little bit of pressure on it because it will resist. Once you hear the click, it is in place, and now with the fan, I can lift the entire motherboard off of the box. As you can see right here, our prong is flipped to the other side, and right here on the motherboard, there is a spot that says CPU fan where we'll be plugging in our CPU fan to give it power. Now our CPU is completely installed on the motherboard, and we are ready to move on to the next part. Now, for probably the easiest part to install on our motherboard, we have our RAM. As you can see here, we have our G.Skill Ripjaw 8GB sticks. We have 2 of these, and we will be installing these on our motherboard. So the first step is to figure out which side or how to orientate our sticks of RAM to install on the board. There is a little slot that we will be fitting onto the slot that we have on the RAM slots on the motherboard. So in this case, we will be staggering our sticks. So we want to put one on the very end right here and one 2 slots over. First, we are going to pull out these prongs on the sides. We are going to line our sticks of RAM up and place them in their appropriate slides and let it drop for a second. Now that we know that it is in the track, we are going to push down on the stick until we hear 2 clicks, meaning that both sides were then clicked in. Now we are going to repeat the process with the second stick, and that is all we have to do to install our RAM. And there we have it. Both of our sticks of RAM are now installed and ready to go. Okay, so now One of the most important parts that we have left is going to be to put our motherboard inside of our case. As you are going to be able to see on the back of the case, there is a plate right here that is going to fit perfectly with the back of the motherboard. The motherboard needs to fit perfectly into the back plate in order for it to fit nicely into the case. The next part you're going to be watching is me putting the motherboard into the case, screwing it in, and then showing you guys exactly what I'm doing next. Let's go.
Let's have a bit of fun till our downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side.
Now, one of the final steps is going to be to install our PSU or power supply. I have already gone through the trouble of choosing which cables I'm going to need in order to power everything in my computer. All I have left to do is screw on the back plate, push it in, and screw it on to make sure it stays still. Now that we have our power supply installed, we can power anything that we want in our case. One of the last steps for us is going to be to install our hard drive. In this particular case, our hard drive storage is going to be in the back of the case just like the power supply was. I will be telling you guys exactly how to put the hard drive into its tray and then install it into the case and plug it in using the correct cables. Now that we have everything installed in our case except for our graphics card, we need to do a little bit of cleaning up. As you can see, there are a bunch of extra cables lying around in the case right now that need to be plugged into places on the motherboard. Plugging in the graphics card now will only make this process a little bit more difficult, so we're going to do that last. Before plugging anything in, you need to look at each individual port and each individual cable and see what plugs into what. Most of the time, each cable is going to have a label on it that's going to tell you where exactly you need to plug it in. The motherboard will also have labels on it to tell you where to plug those cables in. Now, let's clean this thing up. Now that our case is cleaned up and all of our parts are inside, we are now able to install our graphics card. Once we are done putting the graphics card in there, we will be completely done with our build and be ready to use it. Now, for the graphics card, we are going to need to open up a PCI Express slot. This slot right here is the main slot for graphics card and is going to be the one we're going to be using today. To start off, the first thing we can do is the same thing we did with the RAM and plop this little sucker back just like that. As you can see right here, there are a bunch of different cages for when you don't use different PCI Express slots. The two that are open are going to house the graphics card once we install it. Then all we have to do is line the graphics card up with the PCI Express and of course the open grates. And once it's in, you will obviously know because it won't be moving. The two holes right here will be aligned with the graphics card metal piece. Now all you have to do is give it a little bit of pressure and wait till you hear the click. Now all we have to do is screw it back in. Once it is screwed in, now all we need to do is plug it in and it's ready to go. Now our graphics card should be functional and everything has power to it. Now we have finally completed the build and we have come upon the moment of truth. Let's plug this bad boy in. And as long as this PC turns on, we have a successful build. And a good sign already is that green light right there telling us that the graphics card has power. Now, let's see if our project worked. Yeah, baby. As you can see, the CPU has power, the fan has power, the graphics card has power, and the motherboard has power. So, in conclusion, we have made a computer that should be able to run any basic game on the market right now. And let's be honest, it looks sick. So, I just want to thank you guys for watching. This specific project was made for my senior seminar class at Weber International University. If you did like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I hope to see you guys in later projects. See ya.